everyone, the patch notes was released today. After the banger of 3.1, we have a very mixed patch. They definitely weren't light on the notes, but it definitely has its fair share of negatives. But we'll get into that. Subscribe if you enjoy, and let's break it all down. Carbon Roller will speed up in its rolling speed 10 frames faster than before, or about 1/6 of a second. Really tiny change, but it can help it getting out of some situations. Octobrush is going to be slightly more ink efficient when rolling and shooting. This is especially nice for it since it will also help its ink consumption in Zipcaster, but I don't think it's enough to make it too notable a weapon right now. Snipe Rider is getting an ink consumption and mobility increase both by 13%. This should make it a bit harder to pin down, as well as being able to get 3 full charges off without running out of ink, which should be nice. It's definitely nowhere near enough for this weapon. It really needs its damage to objects increased preferably, but it's definitely a start. And that's all the main weapon buffs. Yeah, pretty irrelevant all things considered, but the nerfs were a bit harsher. The lightest one was the Splash-O-Matic. Splash's paint at maximum range was reduced by about 10%. What this change mainly means is it's not going to paint over other weapons when it's outside its effective range, which can sometimes trap them and help it in fights, which should make its range disadvantage be much easier to notice. Machine got gutted, and I mean they really tried to kill this thing. Its fire rate between swings is increased by 5/60ths of a second. Because this 5-frame interval happens between sloshes, that means for a kill time with a direct, it's 5 frames longer, and without one is 10, which is a significant amount of time. On top of that, this will affect it in other ways. For example, its paint and mobility are going to be a bit worse. If you're continuously sloshing, it's going to take you longer. This is going to hurt it in a lot of areas. Is this the end of Machine? Probably not. I think it'll definitely be a high tier weapon or lower part of top tier, but its top 5 spot is definitely gone. It's gonna really struggle to get Booyah Bombs. It's much less flexible, much easier to fight, and I think other area of effect weapons are much more worth picking. It just depends if they're gonna be in a spot that's worth it, you know? At the very least, I'm kind of fine with this. I think it's a little bit extreme, but this was kind of the most unhealthy meta weapon we had right now. It is still gonna be a nice little indirect buff for Crab and Inkjet though, since those weapons aren't gonna have to deal with fighting Machine. Speaking of things Crab and Inkjet aren't going to have to worry about fighting as much, Stamper got some pretty harsh nerfs too. Its horizontal slash width is reduced by 14%, which, yeah, it had a pretty wide hitbox, not really the biggest deal, but the main one is the ink consumption being increased by 30%. So yeah, QR Sword is gone, and most Stamper builds are going to have to change completely. You're going to need to run a lot of main saver on this weapon, probably around a pure. Even with that, its downtime is probably going to be up, and it's going to struggle with the combos a bit more anyway. I think it'll still be fine, but it's definitely going to take a bit of getting used to. It's also worth noting that this Stamper nerf also is going to really hurt its Zipcaster. You're absolutely going to want Ink Saver main, not just for the main weapon, but to make sure you don't just kill your ink tank in that special. Like with Machine, I think they did too much here. I think around 20% maximum would have been a bit more fair, but I think the weapon itself is going to be fine, especially in the hands of people who are used to it, so we'll see what happens. Jumping to points for specials real quick, we just got a few nerfs to it, which is good because special output was a bit high. Neo Splash is 210, sure. Rapid Deco 210, kind of unnecessary, but whatever. Inkjet's really good, so okay. And Ballpoint is 200. Yeah, no, Ballpoint should absolutely be 210. The only reason it's being increased by 10 only is because we randomly made it 190 in a previous patch for no reason. Nintendo, you gotta stop making weapons 10 points for special cheaper for no reason. This is why. This is what happens. You end up creating problems when you actually balance the weapon properly. Please do not do this anymore. Hopefully this was a nice lesson learned. Anyway, the special changes were interesting. There's 3 buffs and 1 nerf, and the nerf is not to what anyone expected. It's not a pre-Wiper Deco being in the game missile nerf, it's not a Crab nerf, it's not an Inkjet nerf, it's not even any specials in the top 5. It's Ultra Stamp.
These guys are just straight up trolling. Like, it's not even a joke.
Stamp now is a 7.5 second duration special instead of 9-second one without any special power up. Yeah, they nerfed this thing's duration more than they did with Crab. It does still have the same effect to where special power up at a maximum will have the same impact as before, so you can stack special power up more effectively to increase the duration, but like, why? It doesn't matter that much. Most of the time you're gonna throw the stamp by then anyway, and the special's still in a fine spot, even if it's probably a little bit underpowered, but it's just kind of why was this a priority? Why did this change need to happen when we left Inkjet unchanged? Again, I don't think it's the biggest deal in the world. I think it's going to be totally fine, and it's the equivalent of a slap on the wrist, but it's just a really random wrist slap. Super Chump got some pretty nice buffs. They increased the paint for when they land, not their explosions, by 40%, which means if you have frontliners going in with them, there's going to be a bit more floor paint to be able to work with, which should be pretty useful. The minimum damage explosion radius has been increased from 25 to 35, so 3 of them will kill instead of 4, and it'll be much more threatening in general. And finally, the chumps will be able to land closer to where the user launched them. This is nice, especially since it's on really aggressive weapons, and you can right now just launch them too far to tank for yourself, so that should make the positioning more flexible. I think these buffs are definitely enough to make Chump a solid special, but maybe not a good one yet. I think the explosion radius for the damage themselves is still really small, but we'll have to see. Regardless, I really like the buffs they did with this. Tacticooler got 2 seconds extra duration, going from 15 to 17 without special power-up, and the maximum with special power-up is unchanged. However, you can have special power-up impact it more easily with fewer items equipped with it, which is interesting because one sub already gave you an extra second, so now you have 17 seconds and it's going to be even more effective. Tac is going to probably last with like 1 or 2 subs of special power, very easy to run, around 20 seconds now, which is pretty substantial. Again, I don't think it's going to make it a good special, but definitely way more solid. The big winner of this patch though is a special that hasn't gotten any changes yet, Big Bubbler. First off, they're making it bigger a little bit, which sure, why not? But more importantly, some specials damage to Bubble is going to be reduced by approximately 50 to 75% of what it was before. What specials are those? We don't know. Why don't they specify? No idea, but I guess we'll find this out on the day of. This should definitely make it enough to where Bubble is a special you want in your comps, but it's still going to get shredded by mains and subs. Just some things like I would assume maybe Crab, Tri-Strike, or even Inkjet are going to be less effective against it. I'd say the main thing that really matters is Jetpack though. If Inkjet is reduced, it already isn't that great at breaking the Bubble shield, and being useful against that special, especially with stuff like Machine and Stamper being nerfed, is really valuable in this patch. We'll have to see how it plays out. I just hope it's not too overtuned, because it could be very easy for this HP to be incredibly annoying if it takes forever to break it, even with specials. So my overall thoughts on this patch are, I think it's positive overall, but it's still kind of disappointing, mainly in the buff section. Reef Slider and Ink Vacuum didn't get any changes on the special side. There were 0 buffs to the numerous utility subs they put in the game, and even the main weapon buffs they did are pretty tiny outside of Sniper Rider, which is nowhere near enough. I think it's very important that patches, especially right now, should be much more buff orientated than nerf orientated, and while there was technically more buffs than nerfs, it's really gonna be hard to feel most of them. Last patch did quite a lot, and I think this one was very underwhelming in that regard. In terms of nerfs, I think it's fine. Splash should be in a pretty healthy spot now, possibly not needing any changes. Stamper should live, though QR isn't an option anymore, which sucks, and Machine will still be playable. And in fact, unless 92 ends up being good, there's not really a lot of competition in terms of AoE, especially since the closest thing to it, Rapid Deco, also got a points for special increase. There's a chance this could lead to more diversity just because the Slayer role is going to have more options with Stamper and Machine nerfed, but I don't think it's going to have anywhere near a positive impact as it was supposed to be. On top of that, Inkjet and Ballpoint was really overplayed, and Ballpoint not being 210 or something like special power not affecting the Inkjet 50 radius probably should have happened as well. Like, I'm glad it got 200p and it wasn't over-nerfed, but this thing should have been 200p to begin with. It effectively isn't changed much to me. And in fact, considering how Machine and Stamper were nerfed, it might even be better than it was pre-patch. It really depends what else rises up to try to combat this thing. We'll have to see. I'd still say it's a positive overall, but a very small one. I'm disappointed compared to how good 3.1 was, and this definitely could have been so much better. However, I was lying about something. There is a substantial buff. Barella's got fixes! Tent shield launch bug and Brelin undercover smaller shield size are finally being adjusted. Let's go, they're now the way they worked in Splatoon 2. And also, they didn't get any other buffs, so they're still really bad. But at least they work now. Mostly. Woo! However, if you're not into the multiplayer too much and instead a Salmon Run player, you got a lot to look forward to, because the kind of buffs we should have been getting happened in this mode. Dynamo is going to be significantly less ink hungry, Octobrush a little bit, Big Swig's going to do better damage when rolling, able to kill stuff like chums in one hit. Sniper Rider will finally not do the worst damage in the entire game, Bucket getting a damage increase, 10 and undercover with more damage, Tri-Stringer, Reflux. Now, obviously, it's Salmon Run. I'm not an expert in this. I can't break it down in a lot of detail, but it seems like a lot of the weaker weapons in Salmon Run are going to feel less bad, which means the rotation should overall be better. And all of these changes just look fun, so I'm happy to see at least something get some substantial buffs. One last thing to note before wrapping up the video, as Anarchy opened, you will finally be able to change your weapons and gear between games. It took 9 months, but we did it. So that's the patch. Definitely a mixed bag to say the least, but it is what it is. I guess we'll be testing it out over the upcoming days alongside the new weapons. See you all next time.